Praise God. I'm sure you have heard this several times already over the last 6 months. We are living in unprecedented times. And at the beginning of 2020, each of us would have made lots of plans. Asher was there with us for our watch night service in beginning of 2020, and we said that we want 2020 to be a year of transformation. And we had made lots of plans, and I'm sure each of you had, maybe made plans individually as a family, maybe for your workplace, as a church. I'm sure we made a lot of plans. And back in 2010, 2015, we probably heard of this Vision 2020, and we'll achieve this and that in 2020. And in January 2020, I'm sure none of us would have expected uh, that we would, or even imagine that we would be meeting like this over Zoom and MS Teams, and using technology to meet like this. And I was just thinking, if this pandemic were to happen even 10 years back, I'm not sure if we would have been able to meet like this, or even have online services. And like I said, we made lots of plans in the beginning of 2020. uh, I'm sure many of them have, pretty much gone for a toss. We are now in week 39. We are going to start week 39 of 2020, and we are getting into the last quarter of the year. And we have no idea how, what Christmas will look like, or how we are going to have a watch night service this coming on 31st. But we made lots of plans. Everything goes to toss. And so the topic I really want to share on today is on time, right? And I want to share some thoughts and learnings I've had, and some things I've been personally studying and meditating on. And whatever I'm going to share pretty much applies to me as well. It's not that I have mastered this. And the Word of God is a double-edged sword. Whatever I'm sharing pretty much applies to me, and this is something I've been struggling with as well. And I've been reading a couple books, and few of the thoughts I'll be sharing on is based on a couple of those books written by Pastors Wayne and Pastor Robert Morris. And these days, everyone is pressed for time, and time in way has kind of become a essential commodity. And it's come to a stage where we really don't have enough time for each other and enough time to do things. We keep hearing that I wish I had 25 hours in a day, or a couple more hours in a day, and all of that. And we are, really living in a society where being busy is like a status symbol now, right? It's the more busier you are, it's almost as though you're more idolized, or you're more prominent in society. It's really become a status symbol, right? And what we want to look at over the next few minutes is how to really be a good steward of time. I often say, like, we have, as Christians or as believers, we have 3 T's that we should be a good steward of. We should be good stewards of our talents, our treasures, and time, right? 3 T's. And I'm sure each of you have heard of that as well. And for the next few minutes, I thought we'll just study together on how to be a good steward of time. So when it gets to time, it's like each of us get 24 hours. Each of us have that same amount of time in any given day. Yeah, over a lifetime, it'll be different. But each day, each of us get 24 hours, whether you are rich or poor, or living in Mumbai or Bangalore or abroad, each of us have 24 hours. And that's not the case with the other 2 T's we just spoke about. Some of us may have more money than the others. Some of us may have talents with the others don't have, so, but when it comes to time, each of us get the same amount in a day. And someone said time is really an account, and God's bank account, where you don't know the balance. So that is something about time, right? Each of us get exact the same thing, then how is it that some people are able to achieve so much with the same 24 hours each of us also have? And so that's what we will try to look at over the next few minutes. And when it comes to the Bible, there are two types of time, right? Because much of the Bible was written in Greek. There are two words for time, and in Greek it's called chronos and kairos, right? Chronos is where we get the word chronological from, or it's a measure of sequential time. And the other word kairos, it is more of an opportune time. So unfortunately, in English, both of it translates as time. But if you really look at the origin, there are two types of time. There is chronos and kairos. And chronos is sequential time, time as we know it. It's like 2 o'clock now, or it's 6:40 p.m. now, or tomorrow is Monday. It's sequential time, and that's how we really know of time as such. That's chronos. And then in the Bible, you'll also see time as phrased as kairos, and that's like the opportune time or the right time. It refers to season in time, or those type of things, and we will look at couple examples of each as well. Okay, so like I said, there are types of time in the Bible. There is the chronos, or sequential or chronological time, and then there is kairos, which is the opportune time, right? And if we can, actually, I have it on the slide. So we'll look at this passage for a few minutes. First Chronicles chapter 12, verses 24 to 37. And can I ask someone to please read it?
First Chronicles 12:24 to 37. From the tribe of Judah there were 6,800 men ready for war. They carried shields and spears. From the tribe of Simeon there were 7,100 men. They were brave soldiers ready for war. From the tribe of Levi there were 4,600 men. Jehoiada was in that group. He was a leader from Aaron's family. There were 3,700 men with Jehoiada. Zadok was also in that group. He was a brave young soldier. He came with 22 officers from his family. From the tribe of Benjamin, there were 3,000 men. They were Saul's relatives. Most of them stayed faithful to Saul's family until that time. From the time of Ephraim, there were 20,800 men. They were brave soldiers. They were famous men in their own families. From half the tribe of Manasseh, there were 18,000 men. They were called by name to come and make David king. From the family of Issachar, there were 200 wise leaders. These men understood the right thing for Israel to do at the right time. Their relatives were with them and under their command. From the tribe of Zebulun, there were 50,000 trained soldiers. They were trained to use all kinds of weapons and were very loyal to David. From the tribe of Naphtali, there were 1,000 officers. They had 37,000 men with them. These men carried shields and spears. From the tribe of Dan, there were 28,600 men ready for war. From the tribe of Asher, there were 40,000 trained soldiers ready for war. From the east side of the Jordan River, there were 120,000 men from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh. They all had kinds of weapons. They had all kinds of weapons.
Thank you, Joel. Um, I don't know how many of you have gone through this passage previously, and if you have been like me, the moment I see all these names, I usually, skip through them. And for you, and I'm guessing there are many of us like that. When we see these genealogies and lists of names, we just skip through that. But I, read of this passage a few couple years back, and just before the pandemic also, this really caught my attention, and I just want to share a few thoughts from this passage. So if you look at So what I've done is I've highlighted all the numbers over here. 6,800, 7,100, 3,000, 37,000. And I actually added up all this, and it's over 300,000. And this passage is really about talking about the men of Israel who sided with David just before he was going to be crowned as king, right? This is the men of Israel that decided to move from Saul's camp to David's camp and side with him to be king. And if you look at all this, there are so many, 300,000 some men who decided to side with David. And here I've highlighted the qualities of all these men. Different adjectives are being used to describe them. They carried shields and spears. They were brave men. They were famous. They were called by name. They were ready for war. They were trained. They were loyal. They had all kinds of weapons. Different adjectives to describe all these men as well. But in the middle of this passage, there is this verse 32 says, from the family of Issachar, there were 200 wise leaders. These men understood the right thing for Israel to do at the right time. Their relatives were with them and under their command. And this is, Kairos time. It talks about the right time or the opportune time. And if you look at the rest of the passage, like I shared, it, so many men, and every tribe they were in the thousands, but from the tribe of Issachar, it's just 200. And the adjective or the quality given to them is they were wise and they understood the right thing for Israel to do at the right time. When all the others, they had, the typical adjectives required for people for war. They had shields and spears. They were brave people. They were loyal people. They were trained soldiers. When all the other tribes are being described like that, the tribe of Issachar is being uh, described as wise men. And they were a small number as compared to all of the others. They were a small number. And these men really understood the right thing for Israel to do. They were wise men. And that is, my prayer for each of us as well. Even we are all of us are talking about the new normal these days, right? And now people have already started talking about pre-COVID and post-COVID. And life is definitely not going to be the same as how we knew it or how it was even in January or February of this year. Once this pandemic is over, it's we are all looking at a new normal. The companies we are working for, they are taking all different measures of allowing people to work from home, and the whole world is rethinking what they're doing. Yesterday I was uh, I enjoy watching basketball, and I was seeing that the NBA season is the playoffs are happening in the US. And I realized that there's no one in the basketball court other than the players. There are no audience. Everyone is watching over MS Teams, right? And they have made huge 17-foot cutouts and all of them, and doing the simulating the audience voices. I also read this morning the IPL that is happening in Dubai. They were, just playing or simulating audience voices or cheering over the loudspeakers. So we are all looking at a new normal. And in the midst of that, do we really know what we should be doing next? As a church, as a family, as individuals, do we know what we should be doing next? And I pray that each of us will have that wisdom, just like the men of Issachar. When the people around us will be described with, okay, he's a great program manager, or he's a great financial manager, or has done financial engineering, or he's a great computer programmer. When all those adjectives are being described for people around us, will we be identified as wise men? Will we be identified as wise men and women, wise children of God? And we may be a minority, right? Do we know, or are we ready to know what we should do as IPC Nerul, or what we should be doing as Whitefield City Church next to really reach out and impact the generation for Christ. And that is my prayer, that we should be ready. We should really know uh, what we should be doing next, and we should know what is the right thing to do at the right time. Grab that opportunity, make the most of every opportunity. And wisdom is something we really need to ask from God during this time, right? And what we need is wisdom from above. There are many things we can learn or study from our colleges or trainings in our company, but what we really need is wisdom from above. And I pray that each one of us will be like the men of Issachar, even though we'll be small in number, that we'll be able to really stand. And I'm sure the men of Issachar were probably the ones who were giving the strategies or helping David make those critical decisions, right? When to attack or where to attack and all of those things. So that is something that has really caught my attention over the last few weeks, and I pray that each of us, and including me, that we'll be like the men of Issachar. The other, so that was on Kairos, right? So when it comes to Chronos, or knowing how we know time in a chronological sequence, or how we know it in days and all. So there are a couple verses. We are all familiar with this passage, Psalm 90 verses 10 to 12. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. If only we knew the power of your anger, your wrath is as great as a fear that is your due. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Right? Um, and another translation for verse 12 says, teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. Right? Teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. And the other many other translations says, teach us to number our days so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So and in verse 10 we see that the average lifespan of man on earth would be 70 years or 80 years, right? And 2 verses later it says, teach us to number our days. So I was just doing a calculation of how many days I would have lived, and I just put this small calculation over here. So if you are 13 years old, you would have lived 4,745 days. If you are 18, 6,500 days. If you are 30 years old, close to 11,000 days. 40, 14,600 days. And 70 or 80, under 30,000 days. And I've lived a little over 14,000 days so far. And the question I was asking myself is, have I been a good steward of those 14,000 days? I'm sure all of us are, we do our tithes, and we are, maybe some of us are particular that tithe is 10% and all of that. But this is a question my mother's grandfather used to ask: do we tithe our time as well, right? And if we go by that logic, of the 14,000 days I've lived, I should have spent at least 1,400 of those for God. And I was asking myself, have I really done that? Teach us to number our days. And I've lived for so many days. What have I done for God? What have I achieved? And so that was something I was really thinking, and really challenging myself. Teach us to number, and the psalmist says, Moses is written in the psalm, teach us to number our days so that we may grow in wisdom, so that we may become wise. And we often have this notion about that the older you get, wiser you have. But no, yeah, I mean, it's not that only if you are a particular age you'll be wise. But even as young people, we have we can exhibit a lot of wisdom. And the example from the Bible I usually like to quote is from the book of Job, where we see when the friends came to talk to Job and apparently comfort Job. There were three older ones, and then the youngest one in that is the one who spoke in the end, Elihu. And he's the one who really spoke sense, or spoke wisdom, and whatever he said was similar to what God eventually also told Job. So it's not that you have to be over 50 or 60 to be categorized as wise. Each of us, we can exhibit wisdom in whatever spaces we are in. And if we number our days, if we choose to live our lives just having that accountability and making sure that we take be good stewards of the time each of us have, I'm sure that we can live each day wisely and really be able to lead others and be able to counsel others and mentor others and say and avoid people going and doing things, spending the time foolishly. And again, this was something I've asked myself. I've lived for so many days on this earth so far. I don't know how many more days I would be having, right? But am I living my life with uh, what God has really called me to do? And when it comes to managing time, I just so again in Ephesians chapter 5, 15 and 16, and that was a verse we put in the flyer as well. Be very careful then how you live, right? Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. And if each of us can think, if we have one more day to live on earth, how best can you live it? You know, and teach us to realize the brevity of life so that we may grow in wisdom. And when it comes to managing time, I know that, like I said in the beginning, all of us are really pressed for time, and whatever time we get, we are trying to finish off our office work or our college projects, and we don't really have time for anything else. But three practical tips, what I would like to leave you with is it's like the three P's of time management, right? Purpose, prioritize, and plan. And starting with the first one, purpose, right? Each of us should try to have a life purpose statement. What on earth are we here for? What is it that we are called to do? What is a life purpose? And you may have purposes for your spiritual life, for your family life, for your vocational life. Try to uh, document or write those purposes. What is your purpose? What is your life purpose statement? And as Christians and believers, one of our purposes should be to become more and more like Christ, to become mature in Christ, right? So, similarly, I would urge each of you, write down your purpose. And once you know what your purpose is, you should be able to prioritize what you need to do. And once a purpose is in line, you should be able to prioritize what the activities you need to do, the tasks you need to do. And as Indians, we often find it hard to say no. It's just embedded in our culture or way of thinking. But the moment you are able to uh, what your life purpose is, what you want to achieve, you will be able to prioritize and say no to the things and we are living in that time and culture where everyone's just trying to get things done and throwing things on each other, delegating and all of that. But we should be able to really prioritize what we need to. And when it comes to now, for example, if one of your purposes is to become more and more like Christ, to become more mature in Him, you should be able to prioritize spending time with God, right? And the moment you prioritize a task, the next P is planning. And this is something that is really important. Block your calendar, put things on your calendar saying, this is what I've planned to do, and this is when I'm going to do it. And like if you don't, and this is something what I personally try to do. I block off time on my calendar when I need to do something. And during this pandemic, I don't know if it is people wanted to try to show that they are more busier than anything, but the moment they see a free slot in my calendar, they will just call, can we discuss this or anything like that. And there were times when I couldn't even really have lunch in peace. So I blocked off that time saying that 12:30 to 1:30, no, this is, you cannot put anything on my calendar, you cannot block it or anything. And Monday evenings, we have our weekly Bible study. I've put that on my calendar. Otherwise, the moment you see someone, if the moment someone sees your calendar free, they will try to block that and schedule something. So I've said, no, this is a time I'm not available for anything else. This is time we are going. I've set apart to have church Bible study, and I've blocked that on my calendar. So this is something I would really urge all of you to do. And uh, document your life purpose. And once you do that, you'll be able to prioritize what you need to, and then subsequently be able to plan your day, plan your tasks, and put on that. And just as a personal testimony, also when it comes to prioritizing time, like I said, we tend to get too busy. And there have been times when at work, I know that I have a busy day ahead, uh, overlapping meetings, conflicting meetings, and all of that. And there have been times where I spend time in the presence of God, make sure that I don't lose out on my quiet time. And when I go into work, I just have that sense of peace, knowing that God is in control. But there have been times where I fail to do that as well. I get, stressed with all the meetings that is planned and everything that we have to do, and I, skip my quiet time, and then that day is just messed up. And we are and the sad thing is I've not learned from my mistakes. Still times where I miss my quiet time and all of that. But this is something what I've experienced personally. The moment you really spend that time or start your day right, start your day with a quiet time, even though how much ever busy you are, how much ever early you need to go to office, if you really prioritize that time with God, everything else will fall into play. Martin Luther said like this: I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. You know, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. And this is something that I pray that each of us will be able to also do, that, that we'll be able to really manage our time. So just 3 P's: make sure that you know your purpose, prioritize your task accordingly, and plan it. One other important point, and I'm saying important because I feel this is something that is not often spoken about in churches. We all know it, but this is something that is not really spoken about in churches. And this is a passage of the Ten Commandments. And I won't read all. I'm sure we are all familiar with this. Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 to 17. There are 10 commandments over here. And what I want to focus on is the commandment number 4. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. The whole passage over there. And what I want to talk about is taking rest or observing the Sabbath. And as Christians, many times we think that this is one commandment that we can ignore. I'm sure, or rather, I hope there's no one in this group that doesn't think that the 10 Commandments doesn't apply today. It very much applies. Everything, the Old Testament and New Testament, is applicable to us. And Ten Commandments is not only as part of the law, it's really principles for living. And what God told Moses and the Israelites years ago, centuries ago, is pretty much applicable even today. And the first three commandments talks about our relationship with God. The bottom six talks about our relationship with each other, with man. And number four is more about both the relationship with God and man, right? And taking rest, right? And this is something I've been personally studying on, and like I mentioned, there are a couple of books I've been reading on meditating and really touch. And this is I'm hoping that I'll be able to really apply what I'm going to share in the next few minutes as well. So, and if you look at all the commandments, the most elaborate is on the Sabbath. Most of the other commandments are just single verses, single lines, right? You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal. And then the one on you shall not have other images before me, that is a little more elaborate. But the most elaborate one is the one on Sabbath, right? And it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And keep it holy, it's not about, or no, on the Sabbath day you should only be reading the Bible, or only going to church, or wearing white clothes, or it's not like that. It is set apart. That day should be set apart. And as Christians also, we are diligent about keeping all the other commandments. We know that we shouldn't murder, we know that we shouldn't steal, we know that we shouldn't commit adultery. But when it comes to Sabbath, we oftentimes try to ignore that. And but that is not the way God intended it to be. That is not the way God designed it to be. And there are a couple other verses I just want to highlight. Exodus 31 verse 15 and Exodus 35 verse 2 clearly says that whoever does any work on the Sabbath, he shall surely be put to death. Even in Exodus 35:2, it says, shall be put to death. And in Numbers, you also see an actual incident that happened in the Israel camp when someone was working on the Sabbath. All he was doing was gathering wood. He was gathering sticks. And since he was working, he was actually stoned to death. And the Lord himself told Moses, this man shall be put to death. And of the commandments, there are actually four that deserve the death penalty. And that is, if you murder, if you commit adultery, if you are rebellious to your parents, and the fourth one is Sabbath. So it was a serious business for God. And we also know that if you keep the commandments, there are blessings you can enjoy. If you don't keep the commandments, there are consequences you need to fail. So my question is, why don't we observe it? This is a commandment from God. Blessings are promised, consequences are also told, but we don't observe it. And observing the Sabbath or taking rest, in a way, it is like trusting God, right? Yeah. And when it comes to tithing, I like to say that tithing is like trusting that God can do much more with 90% than what you can alone do with 100%, right? Tithing is like having faith that God can do much more with 90% than what you can do alone with 100%. And similarly, even observing the Sabbath, it is like believing that you, with God's help, you can accomplish a lot more in the 6 days than what you can do in 7 days without God's help. And in Exodus chapter 16 also we see a passage, and this is even before the 10 commandments were given. In Exodus chapter 16, in the passage we see about the manna and quail. We see where God is really giving instructions to the Israelites. I'm going to pour out manna from heaven. You shall gather manna on 6 days of the week, and on the seventh day you should not gather. But Israelites, being the stiff-necked, disobedient people they were, and God gave two instructions. every day you shall gather what you need for that day. Don't keep anything left over. So that you do for 5 days of the week. On the sixth day, you gather enough for 2 days. But there were people who, on the 5 days, they gathered little more or they kept some left over. And when they saw next day, that was already rotten or, infested with worms. And then there were people who on the seventh day also they went out to see if there was any manna. But this was something even before God gave the 10 Commandments and included the Sabbath day, he had explicitly told about observing the Sabbath in Exodus chapter 15. When we get time, we can read that. And so it is really trusting God and believing that he will provide for us, right? Oftentimes we get into this mode of, oh, I have so much work to do, I need to finish it. But are we really trusting God during those times? Are we believing that God will help us to do what we need to accomplish? And like I said, God himself rested, right? We know the story of creation. After 6 days he himself rested. And in I think it's in Exodus, um, in one particular passage, I think in Exodus 15 or Exodus 31, it says that uh, God rested and was refreshed. And that is why we need to really have that rest or have that refreshment as well, to be really refreshed and rejuvenated. And if each of us know that if we work day after day without any rest, we will burn out soon. And we've got a 8-year old and 6-year old at home. If they don't take that afternoon nap by 6 p.m., they are really cranky. Our bodies need rest, minds need rest. And this is something what this is how God designed it as well. And if you look at these two verses, Mark chapter 2 verse 27, Jesus himself is saying the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made as a gift for us. It was made for us. God could have, made it as a 6-day week, but he made it as a 7-day week. One day was given as a rest for us. But do we really make the most of it? Now you can ask me, does it mean that on the Sabbath day that I should do nothing? No, it's not about that. It's about what you should not do. Don't do your routine work and things that drains you and things that what you're anyway doing the other 6 days of the week. Do things that refreshes you. Spend time in God's presence. And again, I'm not saying that the entire day of rest should be spent only in reading the Bible and praying and going to church. No, that's not what I'm saying. But do things that refreshes you. And spending time in God's presence definitely refreshes your spirit, definitely refreshes your inner being. But do things that refreshes your mind as well. Read a book or go for a walk or spend time with family. Do things that refreshes you. And again, this is not something that I'm only it's not really a one-way communication. This is something that really applies to me as well, and something what I've been struggling with and what I've been wanting to do as well. Just cut off and take rest. And this is something I feel that which is especially for those in the ministry, right? Especially for pastors and missionaries, those in the ministry. This is something that is really important. And the two books I was reading also is written by pastors, and they're talking about how they really burnt out, that they fell into depression because they did not have any rest. And that is going really against what God designed us to be. And this is something I pray that each one of us will also really take to heart. And again, I'm not talking about being idle. There's a difference between being idle and resting. So that's not what I'm talking about. I also believe a idle man's mind is a devil's workshop. I'm not talking about being idle. And like I said in the beginning, today being busy has really become a status symbol, right? If people see you as a busy man, they think, or you think that you have achieved something, or you're something there. But someone put this acronym: busy is being under Satan's yoke, right? It is opposite of God's design. That is not how God designed it to be. Jesus himself rested. We see that how when he was going to meet the Samaritan woman, he was tired and he was resting by the well. When Jesus and the disciples got on the boat, Jesus immediately went to sleep. He took rest. And when you take rest, and we have instances in the Bible also, great things happen, right? When you're really just trusting God, we know the example of Peter. Peter was sleeping, he was resting when the angel woke him up and took him out of the jail. The Abrahamic covenant, when God established that covenant with Abraham, Abraham was put to deep sleep. When Eve was created, Adam was put to deep sleep. So great things can happen when you take rest. And it is really about, trusting God. And like I said, especially for those who are in the ministry, and we should really, attempt or plan it to take one day off. I know that weekends is next to impossible. So maybe it can be a Monday or Tuesday or whatever. Take that day off and say that, today is my day off. And as believers also, we should really be encouraging our pastors to do that, to take the day off, not to trouble them, and share their burden, share their work, and really get to do that, and really believing God is in control. And the meaning of sab sorry the meaning of Sabbath is to cease from labor, to stop from work. And there's this article I just wanted to read from based on a fast food restaurant. Uh, it's a US based, it's called Chick-fil. Okay, so this is a fast food restaurant in the US. It's called Chick-fil. It's like, a fried chicken or burgers type of thing. And the founder was a believer, is a born again believer. And when he started the restaurant, he took a decision that they will work only 6 days a week. The seventh day or Sunday would be an off for the entire fast food chain. And that is a stand he took back in 1946. And the people who are running the chain now is still doing that. And this is something that came in Business Insider in 2017. I'm just going to read that. Chick-fil-A is dominating fast food. The company generates more revenue per restaurant than any other fast food chain in the US, and it's only open 6 days a week. Chick-fil-A has only 2,100 restaurants, and none of its restaurants are open on Sundays. For comparison, McDonald's has more than 14,000 locations in the US, Taco Bell has nearly 6,000, KFC has more than 4,000, and all of them are open 7 days a week. And yet, Chick-fil-A generates more annual revenue than dozens of other chains that have more than twice as many US locations, including KFC, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Arby's, and all of that. So that's right. Even with far fewer restaurant locations, Chick-fil-A restaurants do far more business in 6 days than most of the competitors do in 7. And the same article reported that in 2016, the average sales per restaurant for Chick-fil-A was 4.4 million. By comparison, its most similar competitor, KFC, they got 1.1 million. So Chick-fil-A had 4.4 million, KFC had 1.4. KFC was functioning 7 days a week, Chick-fil-A 6 days a week. And that's really faith, right? And just before the meeting, I was checking on some other statistics of Chick-fil-A, and I saw that Chick-fil-A is expanding even now, during this time when all other chains are shutting down or reducing locations. Chick-fil-A is expanding, and one of the locations they were expanding to is they're taking over a Taco Bell chain, right? So trusting God and believing that God can accomplish much more in 6 days than what you can do in seven. It's really about faith. And coming back to Kairos time, we are definitely living the end times. When we see all that is happening around us, we know that the coming of the Lord is near. And again, we do not know the time, but there are enough and more signals and prophecies being fulfilled to confirm that it can be any time. And the question is, are we ready? Or are we too busy and just living this rat race? Are we trying to accumulate everything we can here on earth and not investing anything for eternity? There are lives being lost, families being broken, people falling stressed and depressed just because they don't have enough time and not spending time with each other. Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are heavy and burdened, and I will give you rest." And I really want to ask each of you, and including myself, we commit ourselves to the Lord and say, "Help me to be still and know that you're God. Help me to remember that you're Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. Help me to be intentional about prioritizing my time, planning my calendar, and taking rest regularly. Help us to be like the men of Issachar, men of wisdom. Help us to number our days that we'll be wise. And I pray that each one of us will be able to really prioritize what we do and spend our time wisely and do much more for the God's kingdom in the days to come.